Alright. What's up, everybody? I am Jesse, or as you all may know me as Game Over Jesse, here with my two co hosts, Daniel and Ilya. But today we have
Hello.
a very special guest for an interview. You all may know her as Zelda in Breath of the Wild, but you're also very well known for a lot of other games and a lot of other roles that you've played as, not just Zelda. It's just the people that are subscribed to my channel are primarily going to know you from Zelda. So why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and let us know a little bit about you before we get started.
Sure. Hi guys. My name is Patricia. I am an actor and voice actor, and as Jesse said, I'm also the voice of Princess Zelda in Breath of the Wild. I suppose some of the other games that I've done, a lot have been with Ubisoft. So I'm in games like For Honor and Far Cry, the Assassin's Creed series, and Ash and Rainbow Six. Um, and aside from that, I do TV, film, and theater as well. And I also record music, which is what I'm doing right now. I'm recording an album. Just my mic is over in another place. Aside from that, I live in kind of split my time between Canada and the US. And yeah, I'm just a working artist who likes to travel and eat good food and meet people.
Nice.
And I'm happy to be on your podcast today.
Well, thank you. Yes, we've been wanting you to come on for a while, so it's nice to finally have you on. And I'm sure, as you mentioned before we started, you'll probably answer the same questions that you've likely answered 1,000 times before.
Totally
So
cool.
apologize for that, but maybe there are some people watching that haven't watched the previous interviews, so who knows. So with everyone that's watching probably knows you from your role in Zelda. So would you like to talk a little bit about how you first got into that role or auditioned, how that went?
Sure. The audition process it came at a really interesting time for me because I had made a big career move to LA just for industry purposes. And I had submitted my stuff to casting directors. And this particular casting director I found through my sister, who was a musician there for many years and had worked with him briefly. And so she gave me a name of a bunch of casting directors that she thought I should submit my packages to. And by this point, I'd already been doing a lot of work in Canada with Ubisoft and stuff. So I had a nice little package of AAA games that I could call from. I submitted my stuff, and it led to an audition for something that was secret. But I had a feeling that it looked like a pretty cool game, and it definitely felt like it had medieval. It had like a princess, king theme, because I was auditioning for a princess and a bunch of other what seemed like magical characters. But I would not have been able to fathom what it was, of course. But anyway, I got an in-face audition, and that led to an in-face callback a few weeks later. And they directed me around a bit. I still was sort of auditioning for a few roles. And then I guess a while later, it's like a big waiting game, those things always, maybe a month or something like that. After that, I found out that I'd actually gotten a role and still didn't know what it was, but I was so pumped because I was like, yes, I made a great impression. This is fantastic. I'm like, oh, just go in there and do a great job for these people because it's the first time you'll be working for them. And then, of course, I get into the room and I find out they're like, do you know what it is? I'm like, no. And they're like, well, it's Princess Zelda. And I was like, what? And it just flipped my reality a little bit in that moment. It was pretty crazy. But yeah, it was quite the journey. And then from that point, yeah, I guess it was a lot of it was a waiting game during the actual recording process. And so because we did the recording sort of in chunks every few months as the game was being developed. And yeah, and I just kind of had to wait and like see what was next and see if I was still on board and see, if they liked what I was doing. I just didn't know. And of course, they're very secretive to begin with. And the whole thing was very secret. So it was a very interesting, mysterious year.
Yeah. So how was your reaction when you first learned that it was Zelda that you were playing as, which has had voice acting in like the old cartoons and the CDI games and stuff, but never really had like from Nintendo full voice acting in the game, and you were being the first person that a lot of people are going to be seeing as Zelda. So how did that feel for you? Was it like a lot more weight on your shoulder compared to other games, or?
Yeah, I this is a question that I do get sometimes, and it's a great question because it in those moments where you land a part, um, you have an adrenaline rush that's so huge you like don't know what to do with. I often say like, yeah, it almost like I almost peed my pants. Like you just like your whole body kind of melts for a moment. You're like, what? Like this can't, it changes your perception. Uh, but at the same time, yes, the pressure was very big because I knew that I didn't know how successful the game was going to be. And you never do know until a game reaches those numbers. Obviously, there's so many things that can happen to very ambitious games, especially when they're being innovative and they're trying a new console and, all these things. So there was a lot of nerves around it. And I am glad that I'd been doing this for a while. I'd been voice acting for 10 years before this role came along. Um, yeah, does that answer your question? I guess I did feel the pressure, and you do need to get down to just doing the work at some point, which is what I do. I rely on the script and the story, and the people in the room had a very tight direction as well, so that was quite helpful.
All
But
right.
yeah, pressure.
So before I let Daniel or Ilya ask whatever they want to ask, I have two more things which I'll ask at the same time. One, what was your reaction when at the Game Awards, Breath of the Wild won like several different awards, which Mario and a bunch of other games were also nominated, but Zelda came out on top, and not just for the Game Awards, which are the biggest ones, but like the DICE Awards and a bunch of other big awards, all for the most part looked at Zelda as like the game of the year. So for you to have like one of the starring roles in a game that won game of the year, was that something different from what you've had in the past? And the second was, aside, like if you go to the past, so before Breath of the Wild, what were some of the highlights of your career that you would say?
Mm.
So those two
Oh,
questions, and then Daniel and Ilya can take over.
okay, cool. I might ask you to ask me that second question after answering the first one, but I'll
All
try to
right.
keep it brief. In terms of the Game Awards, that night was extraordinarily exciting for a few reasons. For one, I was in the audience of the Game Awards, and that was very fun to be part of the sort of experience in the room. The second thing was they announced the DLC that we'd been working on. We didn't know what the date of the DLC release was going to be either. So they were like, it's available right now. And we're like, ah, It was kind of wild too. And I guess at that point, I hadn't realized, I wasn't aware of the numbers of how many Game Awards had actually, I think it's won something like, I don't know, close to 200 Game Awards around the world now. Breath of the Wild has. It's some extraordinary number. But that to me was the epitome, because it is LA. That was the best Game Award, I guess, for me. It
Yeah,
was so exciting. I don't know how to say. It was so exciting to be there and to experience it that night. Yeah.
yeah, it was a crazy night because not only were they giving the award to Zelda, but as you said, they also announced the DLC, which I guess sorry to Daniel and Ilya, but this brings up another question with the DLC. Did you know that did they call you back in to record DLC, or was that recorded around the same time as the previous audio was recorded for the game?
It was a separate time.
Okay.
It was, yeah, after the game was released, and then we sort of waited because we heard maybe there'd be a DLC, but we didn't know. And then when you get the call, you're like, okay, we'll be recording this. So, yeah, separate session. Not too long before the actual announcement of the DLC, really, when it comes down to it. The turnaround times for games are becoming very quick now because a lot of the things don't need to be sort of physically printed; they just get inserted electronically into the files. So yeah, the pressure to churn things out quickly is really interestingly big right now. I've noticed for a lot of companies.
All right.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
were you going to add anything to that? I didn't mean to interrupt.
I think one of the other things that the Game Awards does, and every time I'm in a room, there is also a very big emphasis about the fact that it's not on me. Like I am the name of the title character, and I've done a dubbing part within this huge game that thousands and thousands of people have worked on this franchise and on the game. Like it's a collective celebration whenever a game wins, and it's humbling too, if that makes any sense, because you realize the scope when people go up and they talk about the people who painted the trees and who spent ages figuring out just the map and coding how to get, from one place to another. All those things are just as important as this cake on the top. So I'm pretty lucky that I get to, travel for this reason, because I did this quite small part in this very big game. Just wanted to throw that in.
That was another thing. Who was it? At one of the Game Awards, Greg Miller, if you know who he is, he gave
Game Over Greggy.
Yes, he which actually inspired my name, if it wasn't obvious, and he was, yeah, but he was actually the very first guest when I first started my channel that I had, which I have no idea why he agreed to it, because I was so small at the time. But anyways, he won. Like, I forgot what award it was, like most popular gamer or something, and he gave a speech similar to what you just said, where he mentioned that he was playing, I believe it was like Tomb Raider, and then after he finished the game, everyone just turns it off, but he enjoyed the game so much that he let the credits roll, and he was like looking through the credits, and it suddenly hit him that it's not just the voice actors or the people who are usually put as the face of the game. It's all of these people who work behind the scenes that no one ever hears from or knows about, that they're the ones who are equally as responsible for making the game as great as it is. Because even if the game has fantastic voice acting, if it's full of glitches and bugs, or a certain level is just really crappy, then no one is going to care that it had really good voice acting, because they won't want to finish the game if it's just not fun. So he gave a speech along those lines, which matched up with kind of like what you were saying. So that was interesting. But my final question before Ilya takes over is your past highlights before Breath of the Wild. What are some of the things that you were most proud of that you've done?
So right now, because that question would probably change, or that answer would change day to day, but right now I'm in the middle of recording a second album. And to me, doing original creative work is a really important part of my experience as an artist. And it keeps me grounded, and it keeps me having a real voice that I can rely on somehow, and it enhances my other work. So right now I would say just recording music, however it turns out, because I'm obviously very hard on it when I'm like, oh no, I'm horrible. Why did I do this? You guys go through that too, which is very normal. But yeah, I would say that. And I would say, as far as video game roles go, I'd say the first big exciting thing that I did for video games early on, when you've not landed any big roles before, the first one that I landed that changed my idea of how I could be a video game voice actor was weirdly Beowulf from, I ended up having to do a voice match for Angelina Jolie, and they're like, we need a sort of like weird like Slavic accent that's kind of, it doesn't have to be they said a great Slavic accent, but like something vaguely, Eastern European or something like that. And they were looking for the grains in the voice, and I went in and somehow landed that audition after making a really nice demo that I'd been working really hard on, and it actually led to a role. And that was so exciting. I just didn't even know what to do with myself. And then I ended up going back to theater school after that in London, which was another highlight. But that was my first, I was like, I could be a video game voice actor, and I'm riveted by this work. It's so exciting. And, I was like, wow, you can get paid for this, and it's a thing. So, yeah.
Ilya, Daniel, do either of you have any questions?
Well, I feel like before we go into a little bit further here, a lot of questions we've gotten from some fans. So obviously I want to go over those with you guys. But before I do, just because of the nature of most of the fan submitted questions, I do have to ask, after working on this game, did you ever actually give your own playthrough of it? Because I know a lot of times people will work on a game like that, but they just simply don't have the time to actually sit down and go through it as a gamer as well, or on that side of things. So is that something you actually went and did? And if so, was that weird for you to hear your own voice?
Yeah, so this was an interesting thing that happened to me this last year. I was very excited about the idea of playing the game. I probably got about when all is said and done, about 30 hours of the game under my belt. But what ended up, like, I thought I was going to beat the game. I was like, I'm going to go through this game. It's going to be so much fun. But when the game came out, I kind of got inundated with questions, criticisms, travel, conventions, a new agent, like things. There were so many things around the game that I suddenly had to contend to. And I was just sort of figuring that all out, that it was quite exhausting. And to go into the game and play around was like, first of all, I very rarely have time to do stuff like that for too long, because I am trying to be a creative artist on the side, and it does take directly away from the time allotted to be a creative artist. For some people, that's like a, what would you say? A decompressor. For some people, they go into games and they can decompress and clear their minds doing that. For me, it feels like it's more of an energy sucker, like I'm using creativity to do it. So I do feel the drain in other places. So I just, for a lot of different reasons, I couldn't play the game. Like it actually became hard for me to pick it up. And it was a little weird for me to hear the voice on the game as well as everywhere else. And I was like, I just need to take breaks from it, because it was a lot of weirdly more pressure after the game came out, I think, than when I was recording it.
That makes sense. I was just thinking that one of our previous guests, his name's Orion Powell. He's from the band Here Lies, and he's a big Zelda fan as well. But then because he's in the band and he's doing tours and recordings and stuff like that, he just hasn't had the time to really sit down and get into these games and stuff, right? So I was thinking, that probably carries forward when it comes to a lot of creative things, because even myself, when we start doing video production and stuff, I don't have as much time as maybe I would like to sit down and play these games. One thing as well, noticed just from my own experience doing voice work or acting and stuff, a lot of the times, especially because myself, and I know Ilya as well, we both have theater backgrounds. And so, which is awesome. Oftentimes in theater, you have to even voice work, you kind of can bounce off of someone that you're acting opposite of, right? But in the case of Link, he's a silent protagonist. So in a lot of these cutscenes and conversations, it's a very one-sided conversation with Zelda, and Link just kind of, saying nothing, right? So was that something that was kind of an obstacle when recording, that you didn't have someone to play off of that way?
Yeah, that's a great question, and one I think that changes with each of the games that I've experienced. I don't know about you, but I feel like that would be an adaptable question. So many games now don't have, you really are often doing your lines into the ether. Most of them are like that. For Breath of the Wild, the director was extremely generous. He was one of those like uber supportive directors, and he would often like feed the line to me just before, and then we would. But the thing is, like, also you're doing dubbing work, so you have a line coming across, and then you have to follow the lip flaps. So just to even try to do that technically, you have to keep the intention in your head about what you're responding to, and maybe. It was a little bit of a challenge, but I'd say the bigger challenge is just technically doing the lip flaps that were created for a Japanese language, then translated to English, so that the words and the rhythm of it had to actually be, they still had to match the Japanese lip flaps. That's tricky. That's some of the trickiest kind of dubbing work that you can do. And then also just like keeping the right tone. And so they chose what ultimately they wanted, but we did a lot of different versions of how you would respond to different things. So, yeah. But yeah, that was definitely a thing.
That makes sense. Yeah.
That sounds like a very difficult thing to try and do.
Yeah, it does. I didn't even think about the whole having to match up with the, voice actors for all the other languages, because Breath of the Wild is released in a slew of, and some people change the language over. I always just played in English because I like to understand the game when I'm playing it, but that's just my preference, of course.
Yeah, you'll notice the lip flaps. That's not always the case for anime. A lot of the times they build the lip flaps around the voice, but for this particular one, the Japanese lip flaps were the ones that all the languages use. And so even if you get like a really great performance of something and it doesn't totally match the lip flaps, you have to redo it. So that's tricky.
We actually have about 60 people watching live right now, and they're all saying like how much they enjoyed it and how amazing it was.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, to the 60 people watching, thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Hi guys.
So I'm gonna just personally, like, I wanted to draw for myself doing this podcast. My favorite part has always been the fan interaction, so I wanted to draw from our fan submitted questions for kind of the rest of it, get my stuff out of the way.
Sure.
So one of the questions we got was from actually our friend Axel. So he asked, how has it been involved in a game series with such a passionate fan base? Have you interacted with the fans much? And if so, how many bonker theories have they bothered you about? And do you think it's possible, or would you like to voice a different Zelda in another game in the future?
Ooh, good question. It's funny. A lot of people thought I was going to be in Smash Brothers, and I didn't say it because obviously I can't say anything either way. But I was like, yeah. People were like, "You're going to be in Smash Brothers," and then somebody put it up online that I was, and I was like, "No, I'm not. I'm not going to be in this game."
No, they went with a different version of Zelda for Smash. So.
They did. They did. With that said, I mean, when it comes to would I like to play a different Zelda or really any character for Nintendo, this is just, it's one of those things. Like, some people ask, like, what else would you like to play? I'm like, a Korok. I would love to play a Korok. I'd love to play a tree, which in this case would be a really amazing tree. I would, of course, do any of those things. That would be an honor and a privilege, and has already been such an honor and a privilege. I take it while I can. I take it while it's there, and I accept what I've been given with a huge amount of appreciation. And that's really the only way you can go about these things. But of course, if I was ever asked to do anything else for Nintendo on any level, of course I would do that. Smallest role, whatever, doesn't matter. Just to work for the company it's a huge honor.
Oh, right on. And then about
yes,
section about the fan base as well.
That happened more at the beginning, I think, in panels and stuff at different conventions. Now people don't bother with me with theories too much. I can't really answer them anyway, and I think that the timeline is quite, like, that was a big one, was like, where does Breath of the Wild fall on the timeline?
Oh yeah.
And I think didn't he answer that question? I believe that.
Well, he just gave a very vague answer.
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't follow the timeline.
He's like, well, it's after this one game, that game is like in the very middle of the timeline. And so someone just asked, is it before or after? And he just said after.
Yeah.
And that was it. But,
I think they intentionally wanted to be vague to leave it up to the player's imagination.
Yeah. We all have our own
10,000 years later.
But
right.
But yeah, I think that's kind of a question, like, timeline wise, that kind of probably is more our field of stuff, right? But okay, yeah, so next, Miss Click, who's actually watching live as well, so she submitted a question yesterday. So she says, for Patricia, first off, I have to say I fell in love with your methodology for finding the voice of Zelda. I saw an interview where you said you wanted to portray the voice of a young girl who had to grow up under stress and responsibilities, and old soul, if you will. Thank you for bringing her maturity, justice. I respect you so much for it. The question is, if you could find one trait within Zelda that most resides within you, what would that be?
Ooh, one. I feel like my answer would change day to day because I feel like she's such a full-blooded person. And I think there are many, many similarities. I do put an extraordinary amount of pressure on myself. This is a thing. Okay. So
I think we all do in a way.
Right. And she is so relatable for that reason. So I would say that is one thing, but I think another thing that is a really big recurring theme in my life that is very important to what makes me click is my love of nature. And I grew up in a very small town. I grew up in the woods. I grew up next to Lake Superior. I grew up kissing frogs. And I feel like that part of her out in the fields, roaming around and studying nature in an attempt to answer bigger questions, that is something that I relate to very deeply. That's great. Thank you. And thank you, Ms. Click. Thank you, Ms. Click. That's really
she had a part
beautiful compliment
to her question as well, but I figured I would just start with that one. For her part two, She also asks, for the emotional crying scenes in the rain with Link, did you have other versions of crying in different takes? I personally resonated with the soft, heartbroken cry that you
Yeah.
gave in the published version, but did they have you record different levels of crying? For example, the Japanese version is completely opposite and a very hysterical type cry.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, I put that down to two different aesthetics, two different, slightly different cultural versions of how to go about that kind of scene and what the expectations are in the West and the East about what that's going to sound like. And so, yeah, there were different versions of that cry, but in general, I was told to keep it more muted, like more soft, because that was what they ultimately wanted. And they were pretty specific about that. And there was something about the strength of her character and when she is so fatigued that she finally gives into this crying, that it was like that was for them the most heartbreaking kind of cry, that's what they liked. Yeah.
And I'm going to ask just one more question before I pass this off to Ilya here, because she's been so patient. So this comes from his username's GamerBud. He asks, there is a mod. This is a mod that's made by fans, actually, where they hacked the game, made some changes for Breath of the Wild that allows you to play as Zelda. If you were given the chance to revoice her or voice her to be a main playable character in the future, what direction would you like to take Zelda, and how would you like her to play with Link? Would Zelda take the role of Link and rescue him from the main villain? Would she fight alongside Link? Maybe like a co-op sort of game, or standalone Zelda story with no Link, etc. Although I don't think you would be necessarily the creative decision maker in that point. But in Dream World, if you could have it your way.
I was always so hesitant to answer those questions this year because I'm like, oh, dude, I don't know. At this point, I really love the Hyrule Warriors direction. I think it would be fun to see her play a whole game where maybe Link was like knocked out or asleep and couldn't wake up. And she couldn't wake him up, so she not that you can't even do that. But yeah, something where she played through the whole game, where it was just a given that she was going to be fighting and doing all the things. And I don't really think that that's so far off. I mean, I think that's very feasible. And the mod actually was really beautiful. I saw that mod and I was like, wow, people are amazing.
Yeah, they did a really good job with that one, actually. Just making, because I know her model in the game, her proportions are a little bit different than Link's, so getting her to work in that mod was actually a very impressive feat. I'm not a programmer, so
I'm not either, but I've watched a lot of characters be built up from motion capture skeletons, and I know that sometimes, that's hard. It's very hard.
Great. Okay. Well, I'll hand you off to Ilya now.
Well, first, Cruffy in the chat says she looks just like her, and there's a lot of other people that said this as well, that you actually resemble Zelda in the game a lot.
You do.
That's so crazy. Well, which I never could have. I mean, thanks, guys. Yeah. Thanks. Like, I appreciate that because she's awesome looking. I will say, I don't know if you've met like Elizabeth Maxwell or Bosa, who has red hair.
Oh, does she? Oh, no.
Yeah. In fact, we've joked about this before, and the directors joked about it too, that all the characters have a kind of the essence of who they're playing a little bit.
Yeah,
that is so cool.
We've actually reached out to a lot of the champions, and around the same time that we reached out to you, and we have like half of the champions who have agreed to come on, but we're still waiting to hear back from some of the others. So we're hoping to like get interviews with everyone, if that's possible. Most
of us are going to be in Salt Lake City for Gaming Con. I don't know if that makes any difference, but we're all going to be in one place at one time in a couple of weeks, July 6th through 8th. Anyway, I can pass on a word. If not a podcast, we can pass on a word. We might be busy.
All right. Well, that would be appreciated. But now, Ilya, you can take us out on the podcast.
Yes. Well, as Daniel mentioned earlier, he has a theater background, and I just graduated in May with my BA in theater.
Congratulations.
So, thank you. So obviously, when I was told you'd be on the podcast, I was like, oh, yes. So this is kind of more of a nerdy theater-esque question. I mean, you said you've done also like movies and television and theater, and I've noticed in my limited experience, getting into character is usually, for me at least, I have like my set of interview questions for myself to get into character, or like wearing the costume and the hair and the makeup makes it that much easier to get into character because you already look like your character and you can just go on stage and you're that character. But for voice acting, I imagine it's a lot different because you're not wearing Zelda's costume and like you said, you're having to match the lip flaps and the dubbing, which makes it 10 times more difficult. So I wanted to ask, like, what was your process for getting into that voice? Some people can just step into it. I know they're just like, all right, now I'm doing this character, which I completely envy. It takes me like an hour to get into character for theater. So, or maybe I'm just a snob, but yeah, what was your process?
That's hilarious. So I have a few different answers for that question. First of all, in terms of getting into character for theater, one of the things that I think is important about theater and that makes theater special and different from all the other things is exactly what you're talking about. The fact that you have a ritual around both the warm-up process, the performance process, and the cool-down process. And when you start to do characters that are emotionally heightened, or like when you have to start sustaining those for a long period of time over like a professional run where you simply have to do it, and there's like no, like whether you're sick you have to perform, whether you're, theater is my first love. Theater is where all my stuff comes from. So I feel like I could talk about theater for ages, and I won't, but I think the prep is is different, but it's the same for all the different forms. And for voice acting, oftentimes I'll go and do a gig where there is no real prep involved except for warming up your instrument and just sort of getting your imagination going and doing the things that you learn in theater school, like the warm-up exercises, maybe breathing on the floor, just so you don't like blow out your vocal cords, or, and then you remember that you have like your whole range to draw from, because sometimes you'll go into a room when you're doing a voice, and that's something that you don't get in theater.
Yeah.
You go in there and they're like, okay, we have 5 characters for you to do. Can you do, and this one is 12, and this one is 80, and this one is, maybe around 20, and this one's like 28, and this one's 26, and you're like, how am I supposed to differentiate those 2 voices? But you are often asked to do that sort of thing in voice work. So prepping to know that you could go into a room and do that is different from doing a piece of theater where you run your lines out and in your head, and you make sure your body is really, really warm all the way through to like release out in this direction to a stage and like pitch that way, I don't know. God, I totally got lost. What was the question again? I totally got lost.
I mean, that kind of answers it. I was just like, what was your process for getting into Zelda's voice?
For Zelda's voice. So Zelda was an interesting hybrid of like, I did need to do prep for that because, first of all, there was a British accent, which I used sound files and coaching from a British friend who I went to school with in London, who happened to be an actor in LA. And I would go through the lines and sort of, it took me about like 2 hours of prep before the session. So I'd be warming up my voice, remembering what I'd done last time, going through old files that I'd done at home, like working up into the voice and sort of figuring out where it's at and where the intention might lie. And then with the lines that I did have in advance, because they're not always in advance, but I did have most of them a bit in advance for this one, really getting to know them as well as possible, trying to memorize them to be a little bit off book. Sometimes you need to be fully off book, sometimes not so much. For these, being off book was important because you want to be able to focus on watching the lip flaps and not the words at the same time. Yeah. So that was actually like, in the morning, I would do hours over the weekend if I knew I was recording on a Sunday, and then 2 hours in the morning before going in of just like warming up my voice, finding the register, practicing the accent, going back over the lines, and just sitting in the space for as long as possible, drinking the right tea, going to like, I would be very ritualistic for this one, whereas other voice work, I wouldn't necessarily.
Yeah. Oh, that's cool. And that actually kind of leads me into another question I have, and I think someone else had in the chat. I don't know who it was, about the British accent. I've done a couple accents before, and I stink at accents. I mean, unless it's my natural Southern drawl, I stink at accents. I did Russian once. It was not fun. I was like, you might want to recast this to my director. But So this is kind of a two-parted question, although you kind of answered it because I was going to ask, like, how did you get into it? 2 hours of prepping. Yes. Whose choice was it to use the British accent? Like, did you want to do it? Was it someone saying, let's lean this way? Was it just, let's experiment, and they decided on it? So, yeah.
In the breakdown of the audition, it said UK-based voices as a possibility for this character. And so I went in with that to the audition. And without even knowing what it was, I went in and I prepped with my British friend for the first audition, like several hours before the first audition. So again, like I didn't know that was the direction that they were going to go, or with the other voices. And I think for them, the fantasy world had all the different accents in it. But yeah, I wouldn't have. I did an RP British, which is like kind of the most, it's like an educated, and you can't say neutral because there's no such thing as like a neutral British, but it's like an educated, posh British, not too posh. Some lines, yes, but I kind of kept it really straightforward. If you were asking me to do like a Cockney or like a North London accent or something like that, I probably wouldn't have tried it because I don't feel comfortable enough improvising in that accent. And I do avoid accents that I feel are like really, like I'm not gonna go out and like whip out a Danish accent or something like that. The only reason I felt comfortable doing it, honestly, was because I'd studied in London for a year, and then I'd done it on stage a couple of times with like extensive vocal coaching by the time I got to this. And even then, it's hard. It is hard to do accents, even with all the coaching that you can possibly get. You know, if you didn't grow up with it, it's always going to be a more technical experience than doing your natural accent. And you're always riding that line of like hearing it and being able to feel it, you know?
Yeah.
But I would say the best advice, if you want to have a couple of, I would say get good at a couple of accents, because you can't do everything. But if there are some that you have a propensity for, I would say focus on those and get some training in them. Get, I don't know if you got like the IPA, like if you've worked with like phonetic, like where you like do all the things for it. Yeah. Listen to it, get yourself recording it, listen to it back a bunch of times, and then like work on those, and then have them in your back pocket so that they just need refreshers when you pull them out versus I need to learn this whole new accent. You know? Accent work is hard. Accent work is always hard.
Yes.
All right. We've had you on for about 35. I know we originally agreed on 30, but do you have time for 2 more questions? Ilya,
let's do it. I'm here.
All right, you can ask your final question, and then I want to end with the Breath of the Wild question.
Well, funny enough, that last answer was perfect because I was like, I have 2 questions left, and how am I going to get both? And one of them was like, free advice, and I was like, yes, I just got it. Because I just graduated, so I'm like, what do I do?
Yeah, so you graduated from where did you say? From
somewhere up north. Ilya Rose isn't my real name, so I don't actually have.
Oh, I was wondering where Ilya came
secret.
from.
Yeah, she likes to keep stuff private on the internet, so.
Good
Whereas
move.
I don't care.
I imagine
I'm just
if
like,
I ever got to do voice acting, it'd be like, well, here I am. But I graduated from somewhere up north. It was a really tiny private college that I was really worried it was going to have a crappy theater program. But then it ended up having an amazing theater program. And I was like, because you had to learn everything. You didn't just act. You had to learn backstage and everything. So it was well-rounded.
That's fantastic.
For my final question, and this is probably a difficult question because I have a hard time picking favorites on things, but of all the memory sequences that you had to record, what would you say, or I can include DLC in this too, everything you had to record, what would you say was your favorite scene to record?
Well, that's actually pretty. I've actually gotten that question a lot this year, but for me, it's a toss up between 2, and they're like very much so. The frog scene. Just because it was several parts. It was fun. It was a really fun. They're all fun to record, but like that one, again, I really relate to. I really like frogs. I really do, and I was like, yeah, I totally dig this. I love seeing her in a light moment as well, where she's just like totally in her element. And then the other one was, because I won't give spoilers per se, but you'll know what I'm talking about when I say like the part where she accesses her powers and it all sort of, she feels like it comes together there, and it's like kind of both a surprise, but you know what I mean? Like that was it was just a really special moment in the room, because there was already a soundtrack to what we were recording. There was a lot of the elements of the visuals were in place, and it was kind of a sacred moment for everybody who's like working on the game too. Like you just get those like really like zoned in moments, and everybody's just like really focused. And that was one of those moments. It was very emotional to do that one. It was really, really cool.
Yeah. Oh, I get chills thinking about that scene, actually.
What's funny is those are actually like some of my favorite scenes in the game too. Just like you said, the frog scene, there's that moment of levity where the rest of the game is, it's really tense for a lot of it, and Zelda's under a lot of pressure as a character. So that moment of levity where she's kind of feeling like herself and able to joke around and try and get Link to eat a frog.
Yeah, she turns into a little nerd.
Yeah,
she's
exactly.
Like,
I just love that moment because I felt like that's kind of how I act most of the time in my daily life. So, and then the other scene, there's that big dramatic beat where there's that shift of her realizing her power, but then also this dramatic moment with Link kind of being set up for the game, as it were, again, to avoid spoilers, even though it's been out for a year. But I think most of our fans have played it, but
they have, but some haven't still. I still run into people who haven't even picked it up.
Yeah, so I mean, they should, but it's not biased, of course, if you couldn't tell from
yes, I love your little Link plush there in the back.
Yeah,
I got him from at E3, actually. There was a little booth
amazing.
Way tucked in the back, like behind everything. I almost missed it, but
I'm brokenhearted I didn't make it to E3 this year. I can't believe it.
It was we had a great time. But
yeah,
I think Jesse, you had one more question.
Oh yeah, so I actually had two, but I don't think you would be able to answer one. And that question was for Breath of the Wild, because in movies there's a lot of scenes that are recorded that are deleted and not used. Were there any scenes that you recorded audio for that either weren't used or was scrapped altogether? So was there anything like that, or can you say?
I probably, even if I probably shouldn't, just in case like that becomes like, I should always just, I don't think so, honestly, but I if there was something that I did remember, I wouldn't say.
Okay,
well, that's their material.
Yeah, don't worry.
All right. Well, my final question is, and this is, I guess, one that the Zelda fans would like to know. So Breath of the Wild has, like, within a year and a half, has already become like the highest selling Zelda game to ever be released. So if they were to make a direct sequel, like with Ocarina of Time, they made Majora's Mask, Wind Waker had Phantom Hourglass. So if they were to make a direct sequel to Breath of the Wild and they had you come back, would you prefer that, or would you prefer them, if they did bring you back, for an entirely new Zelda game where you got to play a completely different iteration of Zelda? So which would you prefer? Because Breath of the Wild, it kind of ends on a note where, like, they say something odd is happening, and then there's the cutscene where they go off to explore, and it ends, and it kind of leaves it up to your imagination. So if there was a part 2 that started right there, would you like that, or several years later, or would you prefer to voice a brand new Zelda? So,
I mean, that is a really great question. It's hard for me to answer that question because I feel like if either of those things happened, it would be a whole new kind of, dream come true moment where you get to kind of extend this world further than what it has already brought for you. I mean, I would love to go back in and revisit the Breath of the Wild world and continue to grow, because the more you do it, the more it grows, and it would evolve. And it would be like doing a new character weirdly too. It would feel very new, I'm sure, because it would have been several years later.
Yeah, and this Zelda wouldn't be trapped the entire time.
Right. In terms of a new Zelda, gosh, I mean, that's just up to Nintendo. It's very like I wouldn't be surprised if they went a totally different direction with a different Zelda who was a different age and a different aesthetic. That's like, it's not like Mario where he's like omnipresent across all games and languages, you know. It's a different thing. It's really a character-driven thing. So maybe they would and maybe they wouldn't. I mean, like, I hope they would, but like I also just appreciate that I've been part of the canon. Oh, any of those things would be amazing. That's my answer.
All right. Well, to end the interview, I want to say thank you so much for coming on.
My pleasure.
Yes.
Thanks for having me.
And if anyone wanted to check out some of the other stuff that you are currently working on, where could they find that?
Well, I'm on my socials. That's where I'll be announcing stuff when it comes up. I was just recording. I do have an album that will be coming up probably in the fall, which is a while, because we're not going to release it until it is really ready. I just shot on a couple of TV episodes, which will be out in the summer. Come visit me on social media. That's really the only thing, like, when things come up.
All right, so your Twitter, your Facebook page,
Yeah,
stuff like that. All right, with all of that, thanks everyone who tuned in to watch, and thank you again for joining.
My absolute pleasure, and good luck to Ilya. Break legs.
Thank you.
With all the things that are coming your way, and I know that many things will come. And if I had any advice to give you as an actor, I would say say yes to everything. Do be careful what you put online. If you think it's crap, if it's like, sorry, that sounds really weird. Sounds like, but like if you have like a visual demo that's not up to par, professional material is always better. Don't listen. People will try and tell you that there are all sorts of ways to do things, and sometimes they work and sometimes they're not for you. You just got to follow your gut through it, and it takes a while. It just takes a while. It's a lot like this, so you have to find a way to make yourself be like that.
Yeah.
And that's up to you. That's up to you. This career is insane, but
Yes, it is.
But the adventures await you, I'm sure. So
Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right, I guess with all of that, bye everybody. Thank you again for watching.
Thank you so much.
ciao. Lovely talking to you guys.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.